everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today.
Oh.
That's right, because today we are talking, another first for the show here. We are talking about an independently published book by an independent author.
You are correct there, Charles. We're talking about Daughter of Flood and Fury by Levi Jacobs, the Zebulon Award-winning from 2018 Daughter of Flood and Fury. It's a young adult fantasy novel that is by a self-published fantasy blog off finalist, Levi Jacobs, and that's commonly known as the SPFBO. That's a competition run by friend of the show, Mark Lawrence, who, awesome way to spotlight indie authors, and that's what we're here to try to do. I mean, we're just starting to get to a point where Charles and I feel confident that there are people listening that aren't our parents. And Charles's mom listens. Hi, Rosemary.
Hello to our parents,
my mom listens. Yeah, I don't know if my mom listens. But that being said, now that we're feeling kind of confident about that, we're hoping to try to use our tiny version of a platform to be able to speak out and say things about self-published books that we really enjoy, and this is one of them.
That's right. And this one is a particularly interesting story because Dylan, this all came about through your conversations over on the Twitter sphere, right? That's how we ran into Levi Jacobs, the author?
That's correct, Charles. So basically, we send out these sort of social media calls, I'll call them, on Twitter or on Instagram, where you can find us on Twitter at the FTF Podcast 1. And we basically ask, what kind of recommendations do you have for a particular, often popular book series? And we did one for Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson, and we pretty much gather information from social media folks to expand the books that we end up talking about on the episodes where we do book recommendations for fans of Mistborn or whatever other ones we do, like we've done Tidecaller Chronicles stuff too. So a name that came up during this, I believe Calvin Park recommended Levi Jacobs' work, citing the Resonance Saga, and that was the one that made the finals of the SPFBO. And then we actually had an email arrive from Levi Jacobs himself.
Yes.
And he gave a recommendation of some of Brent Weeks's work, and we talked about that in the episode. But he also basically said, hey, I've got this book coming out on January 18th, which has probably passed by the time you're hearing this, if Charles knows all that stuff. And then he's like, if you want an advanced reader copy, which Charles and I are still trying to figure out if it said ARC or ARC, but I think it's ARC.
Yes.
And and he basically said, would you like to take a look at it? And receiving high praise from folks like Calvin Park over at Under a Pile of Books and all that.
From an author who's experienced in the Mark Lawrence self-published book off competition. It's like all these things, all our stars were kind of aligning for this one. So we were more than happy, more than appreciative to take a look at the first book of this. What's the name of the overall series here?
The overall series is
Tidecaller Chronicles. Yes, and starting with Daughter of Flood and Fury, which is what we're talking about today. How do you want to kick this off? I mean, I've got the back of the book blurb here. We could read that, unless you want to jump in and share some thoughts right away.
Well, go for the back of the book blurb because people
it is well written.
Can know, yeah.
For those that haven't checked it out yet, so this is about Daughter of Flood and Fury. Althea was born a heresy, a girl with a man's magic, in a city where monks and witches are mortal enemies. Training in her powers only under her father's protection, head of the monastery, she shocks everyone by becoming the best seer in generations, until her father is murdered. A suicide, they call it, but she knows the truth. He was murdered for his heresy. For her. Now she must make a harrowing choice: disown everything her father stood for to stay alive, or flee the temple and seek to expose his killers, even as they hunt her down. Daughter of Flood and Fury is the gripping first book in the Tidecaller Chronicles. If you like strong female leads, clever magic, and page-turning action, then you'll love Levi Jacobs' epic fantasy adventure. And I think that last part is very well said. I would agree.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that the Sanderson vibes were pretty clear early on, and Levi said to us that he's watched a lot of Sanderson's lectures and stuff like that, and you can tell that the influence is there. One of the things that sticks out pretty early on is this hard magic system that is conveyed really from the first chapter, and it's got that kind of feel. We've talked on the podcast about the Sanderson's laws of magic in our Mistborn and the Art of the Magic System episode, and one of those laws is about basically the extent to which you as a writer can solve problems using your magic is directly proportional to the extent to which people understand the magic. And right. I think that Levi seems to be going the route that Sanderson goes, where the magic is something that you understand well, what it can and can't do as a reader. And Levi then uses it kind of as a tool in the tool set. It's nice to see how the characters use the magic system in clever ways to solve their problems, and it feels earned when they do.
Right. And also it's the kind of magic system that lends itself towards some pretty interesting action. It has a lot to do with using water to kind of sense people's thoughts and communicate with people through thought. And all these kind of water metaphors and the way this whole temple is structured and cities are structured around having water flowing through them is super interesting. And depending on how much water is in the setting affects the fights, so it's super interesting to see how that plays out. And then it's the next level up where there's, male magic and female magic, and they kind of become political factions, and it's interesting to see how they play off of each other. And it's the scheming, getting involved with the magic, and then there's this overall epic kind of mystery surrounding the whole thing. So it's all kind of built in this very interesting way, and that I would say is perhaps Daughter of Flood and Fury's biggest strength.
Yeah, I think that's one of the strongest parts of the novel for sure. So I was excited to see all that, and as you're talking about, Charles, it's cool to see the way that the world does, I guess, adapt to the magic system in the way that you'd actually expect a world to, where sometimes you read a world and the magic's in there, but you can start kind of noticing, like, wait, if they were able to do this magic thing, then why wouldn't the world change in this way? And I think Levi does a great job of saying, well, the world would change in all those ways, so I'm going to make it have changed in that way. So really appreciate that, and definitely a highlight of this book. But I think another highlight for me, Charles, here were the themes as well. I thought that it was really interesting to see how Levi approaches some of these, and we won't spoil anything. We'll talk very broad strokes here. I mean, the book has probably just come out by the time you're hearing this, and we are trying to give you the chance to read it for yourself, so this is not a buddy read episode. But I was very impressed by how he's able to. It's like subtle at first, but I think start toying with and exploring these ideas of femininity and masculinity and how one can grapple with both parts of oneself and how that's reflected in a larger society. I think when I was first reading it, there's a lot of this like, okay, well, like, uh, I'm a girl and it's a patriarchal system and that kind of stuff. And those are always interesting to see in fantasy, and we've seen it a lot. So then it becomes, how are you going to tell us a story that grapples with these kind of things? And I was interested to see where that started to go. And I think there's still a lot more for Levi to do with that theme as we continue to move through what it looks like he intends to be like an 8-book series. I'm not sure if he's settled on that yet.
Right, and to just kind of add on to those themes, we know from the blurb here that right at the beginning of the book, her father, is murdered, and they call it a suicide, and she's like, she's trying to come to terms with that obviously makes her relationship with her father very complicated, and how that theme kind of goes through as she's navigating the politics of the temple and her own interpersonal relationships. Navigating. Nice. Yes. So yeah, thank you. And that is just another layer that adds a really nice personal touch to the characters, Dylan, which is super important in this series. I think one of the highlights for me is, the relationship. We find she gets all buddy with, I don't want to give away too much here, but she does end up meeting people along the way and developing these really meaningful relationships. Do you think it's spoilerly to go into it? Should I mention these characters?
Yeah, well, Charles, I don't think it's spoilery to just say that there are other characters, like Gaxna is one of the
that's who I was
characters.
Dancing around.
Yeah, that's who I'm figuring. I think the relationship between Alethea and Gaxna is a core part of this book, and you expect it's okay for, I think anyway, to just say that there's a well-developed relationship there that is fun to read about. Their exchanges are interesting because they come from very different backgrounds, and they're both dealing with some like trust issues and stuff like that. And I think that actually Gaxna kind of gave me some like Clara vibes from. I don't know if that came up for you at all, Charles.
I did get some Clara vibes. There's definitely some roguish qualities to Gaxna. Yes. But it's in an interesting. It's done in an interesting way. She has a very unique backstory, and her kind of emotional alignments, her sentimentality, juxtaposed against her learning like the School of Hard Knocks kind of idea of being a thief and a roguelike character. It's super interesting. And then compare that to like meeting our main character here, Alethea, meeting her, who is just born and raised in the temple and has no experience, has none of that like worldly experience that Gaxna has. It pairs together really well.
For sure. And I think if we're going to talk character, definitely want to give Thea a chance to shine here. And I was thinking, Charles, she does fit sort of in that Vin to Rin continuum that we've talked about before. Vin from the, So that's our little theory here about some of these like strong, powerful teenage female protagonists, as you can place them almost along a continuum in how probably the best way to think about it is like, how dark are they, or what can we expect we're in for with that kind of thing. And lots of strong characters all across the continuum.
Sure.
And one of them is Vin from Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. All the way on the other side, Rin is from the Poppy War trilogy. And I think that there's a character, it's a young adult book, which I think we haven't mentioned, but I do think
you mentioned it.
Have. Okay. it's a young adult book, and I would say the protagonist fittingly feels more along the lines of the Vin side of that. You know, she's strong. You learn very early on, as soon as the first chapter, that she is extremely competent, and she has some of those like issues with trust that you see from Vin from Mistborn. So those kind of elements came up for me a lot, and there's some fun. I think that I don't want to get into spoilers, so I'll just say some things that reminded me of Vin.
Yes, and I also say she also reminded me of Vin because of how clever she is in, like, she can take down foes that are maybe physically stronger, but she's clever about how she uses the magic system in combat. Exactly like Vin would. Like, the reason Vin wins fights is not from overpowering her foes, it's from coming up with some clever, creative way to either trick the foe or flip the magic system on its head or whatever. And I see a lot of that in Thea as well, of her ability, her understanding of the magic system in this world of being a seer, gets her pretty far in combat. And that's, when we were talking about the combat and it being Sanderson-esque, it all kind of pairs together. So yeah, on the continuum, definitely close to the Vin side for sure.
Yeah.
So
and that's why.
Go for it.
That's why I think that the book recommendations for Sanderson bit that Calvin Park brought Levi Jacobs' name up, and I think makes a lot of sense. And I think you'll find
fans of Vin are going to definitely have a good time here for sure.
I think so. Fans of Vin, fans of Mistborn, that kind of bit. Those are the folks I would start recommending this. I think it's interesting. The book, Charles, is very focused. It's compared to most of what we read on here, it's a relatively short book, and it doesn't expand out anywhere to near to the extent of something like Mistborn. It's very character focused on one particular character's journey. It's in the first person. It's actually in present tense, which I think is more common among young adult. We don't read a ton of young adult on the podcast here, but I think like Hunger Games was present tense as well, if
I don't
remembering correctly. But either way, that I think was something that for me was a little bit jarring at first, was reading in the first not in the first person. Reading in present tense was the jarring part. Reading in first person is I think pretty standard for what we read. Things like Tidecaller Chronicles and stuff are, well, that's complicated, but you know what I mean. And the frame story. But all that being said, the present tense thing, found it a little bit jarring at first, but once I got going, I definitely stopped noticing that as much. And it's interesting to see it bring a little bit more of an immediacy to the things that are happening, Charles, where it's like, oh, wow, like this fight is going on right now.
Yes, it brings it like it opens in a pretty intense way, like when she's just like, I'm stronger than them. That's their mistake. I'm this. I'm that. I grab the shaft. I like hit him in the face. It's like it gives it a very violent, intense, and also fast pacing feel to it right off the bat. Like she's like sparring at the beginning of this book, and right away you're like get a sense of this writing style of like it starts kind of like pretty intense. She's very determined, very focused, very almost aggressive when she's fighting. And that continues throughout the story. Like you said, it's short. Amazon has it listed at 205 pages, so it's a relatively quick read. And the pacing of it is quick as well. And I found that to be actually quite enjoyable. I felt like we were moving along at a really nice pace. And this whole thing is around this idea of like the blurb says, it's like, do I disown everything my father stood for to stay alive, or flee and seek to expose the killers? I'm being hunted, all these things. So there's all this political intrigue going on, politics going on, and there's almost like this mystery of like what's all this about her father and her being a heresy and all these other, like, was he murdered? Was it a suicide? So that's kind of the driving force of this book, the driving mystery and the fast pacing, the action that we get along with it, and the fact that it's a quick moving book as well, has just made it a really fun read.
Yeah, I think the pacing has it moving along pretty quick, right? Like every chapter, something's happening. We're either getting more answers or getting closer to answers. And I cruised through it. I actually found one. Yeah. Once you get going with this, you do find yourself wanting to know all the answers. It does have those mystery elements that Charles was just talking about. And you will get a lot of those answers for sure. I do want to give a heads up to our listeners that, like I mentioned, this is going to be a long series, and I think it did say at the back of the book it was 8 that he was thinking of going for, 8 total books in this chronicle here. So I do want to give a heads up that you're going to want to know, like,
it's not a standalone.
Resolved. Yeah, not everything, like, not to the point where you're going to be like, we didn't get any conclusions, anything. So you get a lot of answers, but you have to know that when someone is going to write a really long series, that there are going to be some things still left open. Won't say what things are left open, what things aren't, but we've got a long way to go, and I'm excited to see where the rest of this journey ends up taking us.
I'm excited as well, as tight to Thea's perspective as we were throughout this book, and as quick of a pace as we were moving, trying to find answers. There is a world that Levi's building in the background, and it's super interesting to see how all that kind of is getting built up as we go through the action of Thea looking for answers, right? So, like, it is one of 8, and you do get that sense of, like, there is a bigger world going on, but that in no means takes away from the present action that we're experiencing in the story. So there's something for everybody in there, and I'm curious to see how this world kind of opens up as the Tidecaller Chronicles expands in the future.
I feel the same way, Charles. I got the sense that we were just getting the tip of the iceberg here.
Dipping our toes in the water, if you will.
Just dipping our toes in the water. Nailed it, Charles. And I was feeling as though a lot of, I don't know if hint is the right way to describe it. There's a lot of stuff where you can see there's a lot of room for us to expand to other locations, to bigger pictures. I have to think we're going to get even more epic as this series continues. So that's something that has me super pumped.
Yes, I agree. And, much like we saw with Sanderson's magic system, where it expands on top of itself and that only just makes it more interesting, I have a feeling we're going to get a lot of that in this series as well. You're introduced to this idea of being a seer right away, and it's action-packed, and it's got a lot of moving pieces to it. And I'm interested to see how the layers kind of stack on themselves, and this magic system grows as the universe expands as we're reading it. So I think, what we've seen so far, Levi has proven that it's, he's has plans for all kinds of fun ways for this magic system to grow and interlock and expand.
Well said, Charles. I mean, a big thing that Sanderson focuses on that you can tell has, or at least seems to have influenced Levi. I don't want to speak for him whether or not this has, but we do know he draws a lot from Sanderson and his work and his teachings, really, is expand on what you have already before you add something new. That's Sanderson's third law, and I think of it as depth over breadth. And you can tell that with the world building aspects that we've talked about, where all the settings that Levi is providing for you have the way the magic system works and how it changes the world weaved into it. And that's a big depth over breadth, because there's so much we can see just with what he's given us with this magic system. And I think that I'm excited, like you, Charles, to see how he continues to dig even deeper into those depths, maybe to deep depths of the ocean. Even,
yes, exactly. I think, it's interesting to when you finish the book and you read the acknowledgments, and he said multiple times, like, this is going to be a big series, guys. So it's like, so as an experienced fantasy reader, you can see it's like we're getting this really tight present tense, first person, one character focused story, and we're learning everything we need to learn with the promise of more stories. So I do think he's taken that third law into heart of like, let's get this depth going and let's see like how far we can push this idea of being a seer and what that means and how it affects politics and the setting around you. And it's, this book certainly delivers on that. And then also it kind of opens up this idea of having a larger series. It kind of opens it up to so much potential.
Yeah. So I'm super excited to continue with this. I do want to figure out, I got some researching to do to figure out if Levi's spoken much about his plans for when we can expect this book to continue, and I'm sure we'll be back and talking about the next one. And I think you can also head over to Under a Pile of Books if you want to hear a great interview from Calvin Park with Levi Jacobs. That you'll hear more about this. That it was a while back, so it won't be talking much about Daughter of Flood and Fury, but talking about Levi's past work and also talking about him. And who knows, maybe Charles, even you and I might have to reach out and see if Levi would be open to chatting with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Always welcome. Would love plenty of questions to ask him. I think we would need to do like a spoiler episode or like have the back half be spoiler because there's so much I want to get into this plot about with him. So we'll see whatever he's game for. I will also say, my experience with like self-published authors is very limited. I went in pretty inexperienced to the like self-published world. I didn't quite know what I was getting into, and it's it was a lot of fun. It's so cool to have a communication with the author being like, hey, here's my story. We get to talk with them a little bit before we read it, and being part of this community has been a lot of fun. And the series Daughter of Flood and Fury has certainly lived up to that. So just a fun read. Really appreciative for Levi for thinking of us and reaching out and providing us that ARC copy, and we look forward to reading more.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Charles.
All right. Are we ready for that sweet, sweet outro music?
Get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping over here.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you want to talk Daughter of Flood and Fury with us, or shoot some more indie authors our way for this Spotlight series that we're thinking of starting, let us know. Twitter's a great way to reach out to us, and that's at the FTF podcast with a number 1 at the end. Facebook and Instagram are also pretty good options, and that's at the FTF podcast. You can email us directly. Imagine that, emailing Dylan and Charles directly through the FTF podcast at gmail.com. That option is available to you. And let's say, Dylan, that I'm someone who's listening. I really enjoy the show. I want to show my support in a way that's free but also super helpful. And let's say I'm listening on, I don't know, let's just say Apple Podcasts on my iPhone. What can I do?
Well, if you're Charles's wonderful mom, Rosemary, then you can just shoot a text Charles's your way. But if you are someone who's not Charles's wonderful mom, Rosemary, then you can toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just scroll down on that Apple Podcast page, find those stars, click 5 of them, write a review if you have time.
That's right. That's super, super helpful. But you know what? Just making it to the end of the episode is more than enough. Thank you all so much for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.